Dad gave my inheritance to brother's gambling debts. Lawyer found a loophole and got it all back. My dad's voice was coming through the speakerphone like it was underwater, muffled by the cheap conference room echo, but I still heard the exact moment he decided I didn't get to be a person in the story anymore. "I did what I had to do," he said, flat and stubborn, while my brother's sniffles and my mother's tiny, panicked breaths filled the gaps. My lawyer slid a stack of papers across the table toward me and tapped one page with the back of her pen like she was marking a crime scene. The number circled in blue ink wasn't just a number, it was the amount that used to be mine. My inheritance. Gone. And when I tried to speak, my throat made that tight, squeaky sound like my body was trying to swallow the whole situation to keep me from exploding. I pressed my palm to the table to steady myself and felt the laminated surface tacky under my skin, like it had been wiped with something that never fully dried. "Dad," I said, forcing the words out carefully, "you moved money from a trust that was set aside for me. You know that, right?" On the line, my dad made a noise like he was tired of being questioned. My brother, Kyle, muttered something that sounded like, "I'm sorry," but it was the kind of sorry that floats in the air and dissolves before it lands anywhere real. My lawyer, Mara, which felt ironic because I'd never met a Mara who didn't mean business, leaned closer to the speakerphone and said, calm as ice, "Mr. Harris, I'm going to ask you one more time. Did you authorize transfers from the Evelyn Harris Irrevocable Trust to satisfy Kyle Harris's personal liabilities?" The way she said it, slow, clinical, made my stomach turn because it made it sound like what it was. Not helping family. Not a hard choice. Theft wearing a cardigan. It started the week after my 30th birthday, which is almost funny because my whole life I've been told 30 like it was a finish line. When you're a kid and your parents are struggling, they tell you stories about how one day things will be better, and in my family, the story was always Grandma Evelyn's trust. Grandma died when I was 16. I remember the smell of her perfume clinging to my jacket at the funeral and the way her house felt too quiet without a radio playing old music. She left each grandchild a set amount in a trust. Nothing billionaire, but enough that you could start adult life without drowning. My dad used to say it like a promise. When you're 30, you'll have your cushion. I didn't spend my 20s waiting for the cushion. I worked. I saved. I did the boring, responsible thing because I didn't trust someday. I rented small places, drove a car that always made one weird noise in winter, and paid off my student loans on my life depended on it. Meanwhile, Kyle. Kyle is older than me by 3 years and has always been the kind of person who lives like consequences are optional. When we were kids, he could break something and somehow I'd be the one apologizing for getting him upset. He was charming when it benefited him, sulky when it didn't, and our parents, especially my dad, treated his chaos like weather. Unpredictable, exhausting, but inevitable. When Kyle started gambling for fun in his early 20s, everyone laughed like it was a phase. When it became a problem, everyone whispered like speaking it out loud would make it real. By the time I was 28, Kyle and money were words my parents said in the same breath with that same pained expression. He'd borrow, promise, disappear. He'd get a new job, brag for 2 weeks, then lose it. He'd swear he'd stopped, swear he'd changed, swear he'd learned. I stopped lending him money after he borrowed $2,000 for rent, and I saw him tag in a photo the next day at a casino, grinning like a kid at Disneyland. When I confronted him, he told me I was judgmental, and my mom said, "He's struggling." Like struggling made lying noble. On my 30th birthday, my dad hugged me and said, "Now the trust stuff will be simple. We'll get the paperwork going." He looked proud saying it, like he was handing me a gift he'd personally earned. I remember thinking for the first time in years, maybe this was one thing in our family that would happen the way it was supposed to. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the bank that managed the trust account. It was the kind of automated, polite email that says important information regarding your account, with a PDF attached. I opened it at my desk during lunch, expecting boring legal language and instructions. Instead, I saw a transaction history, multiple withdrawals, large ones, a balance that made my eyes do that weird refocusing thing, like if I blinked enough times the number would change. I read it again, then again. My mouth went dry. My hands started tingling. I stood up so fast my chair squealed and someone in the office looked over. I walked into the stairwell because I didn't want to have a meltdown in the open-plan kitchen, and I called my dad. He didn't answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, breathy like she'd been waiting. Is Suadia. Mom, I cut in. What happened to the trust account? Silence. Long enough I could hear my own pulse. What do you mean? She said, too soft. I stared at the concrete wall like it could hold me up. It's empty, I said. It's not just lower. It's basically gone. My mom made a small sound that wasn't a word. Then, like she'd been forced to swallow a truth, and it finally came up, she whispered, Your father didn't want you to find out like this. I laughed once, sharp and shaky. Find out what? She didn't answer. I heard her inhale, then exhale. Then she said, Kyle got in trouble. I felt my legs go weak and slid down the stairwell wall until I was sitting on a step, phone pressed to my ear. Kyle is always in trouble, I said. What did Dad do? He helped, my mom said. And the way she said help made my stomach turn. What did he do? I repeated, louder now. My mom started crying. Quiet, careful crying, like she didn't want anyone to hear. He said it was the only way, she whispered. Kyle owes people. A lot. And he was scared. Your dad was scared. My vision blurred. He used my trust, I said. It wasn't a question anymore. My mom didn't deny it. She just cried harder, like my pain was a thing she couldn't fix, so she was going to drown in it instead. I drove to my parents' house that night with my hands shaking on the wheel. I remember noticing dumb details, how the streetlights made everything look orange, how my car's air freshener smelled like fake vanilla. And thinking weirdly, my life is splitting in half right now, and the world still smells like vanilla. Kyle's car was in the driveway. Of course it was. Inside, my dad was in the kitchen, arms crossed, jaw tight, like he'd been preparing for battle. My mom sat at the table, tissue in hand, eyes swollen. Kyle was on the couch in the living room, hunched forward with his elbows on his knees like he was auditioning for sad brother who made a mistake. When I walked in, Kyle looked up and said, Hey, like we were about to watch a game together. I didn't take my shoes off. I didn't set my bag down. I just stood there and said, Did you take my inheritance? Kyle flinched and looked at my dad immediately, like he needed permission to speak. My dad's voice went hard. Watch how you talk. I stared at him. You emptied Grandma's trust, I said, and the words tasted metallic. For Kyle. My dad's face didn't move. It's not like that. How is it not like that? I demanded. The account is drained. Kyle spoke then, voice thin. I didn't want it to happen like this. I turned to him. So you did want it to happen, I said. Kyle's eyes got watery. I was desperate. And I wasn't. I snapped before I could stop myself. Do you think I've been coasting? I've been working since I was 16. I skipped trips. I said no to things. I built my life on the idea that if I worked hard enough, I wouldn't have to beg. And you? My voice cracked, and I hated it. I hated giving them evidence that I was emotional because in my family, emotion gets used against you. My dad stepped forward like he was going to physically block me from saying more. Enough, he said. We're family. That word. Family. The shield they put up every time someone's about to get held accountable. You stole from me, I said, staring at him. You're the trustee. You knew what that money was for. My dad's nostrils flared. Kyle was going to get hurt, he said. Do you understand that? It wasn't casino fun anymore. It was debt. Real debt. Men showing up. Threats. My stomach twisted, but it didn't soften the rage. So you chose him, I said. Again. My mom made a broken sound. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this. Don't do what? I said, voice shaking. Don't react. Don't make it real. Kyle stood up, palms out like he was calming a wild animal. I'll pay it back, he said quickly. I swear. I'll get a job. I'll do a payment plan. I laughed, sharp and bitter. You couldn't pay back the $500 you borrowed from me 2 years ago, I said. You're going to pay back my inheritance? Kyle's face twisted. That's not fair. My dad snapped. He's trying. I stare at my dad, and something in me went cold. And you're helping, I said. by sacrificing me, like I'm the extra piece. My dad's eyes flashed. You'll be fine, he said, and I swear those words landed like a slap. You're stable. You have a job. You're responsible. Kyle needed it. I felt my chest tighten until it hurt. So my reward for being responsible is getting robbed, I said quietly. My dad's jaw worked, but he didn't back down. I did what I had to do, he said. End of story. I walked out. Not dramatically. No screaming, no slammed doors. I just turned and left because if I stayed one more second, I was going to say something unforgivable or I was going to crumble on their kitchen floor, and I refused to give them that. In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel until my hands cramped. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. Please don't take this further. We'll make it right. I stared at the message until my eyes burned. Because we'll make it right in my family always meant someday, always meant if it's convenient, always meant if Kyle doesn't implode again first. The next day, I took a personal day and called a lawyer. I didn't do it like some revenge movie move where I dramatically vow to destroy everyone. I did it because I couldn't breathe, because I kept replaying my dad's, "You'll be fine," and feeling something split inside me. Because Grandma Evelyn didn't leave that money so my brother could feed it into a casino until a stranger forgave him. She left it to give me a start, to give each of us something. And my dad had treated it like a family emergency fund where only Kyle counted as an emergency. Mara, the lawyer, was not warm. She wasn't unkind, but she didn't do sympathy the way my mom does, with soft voices and excuses. She did clarity. I sat in her office with my printed bank statement and my hands shaking, and she asked questions like she was building a structure. "Who is the trustee?" she asked. "My dad," I said. "Are you a beneficiary?" she asked. "Yes." "Do you have a trust document?" she asked. "I've never seen it," I admitted, and it made me feel stupid. Mara's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's interesting," she said, and for the first time her tone changed. Not dramatic, just alert. She sent a formal request for the trust deed and all account records. My dad ignored it. Then he got a second letter with stronger language. He ignored that too. Then Mara filed something. I didn't even fully understand what at first, just that it forced disclosure. And suddenly my dad's end of story wasn't the end of anything. When the trust document finally landed in Mara's hands, she called me and said, "Come in." I could hear it in her voice. Controlled excitement, the kind professionals try not to show. In her office, she laid the trust deed out like a map. "Your grandmother created an irrevocable trust," she said. Irrevocable means your father cannot treat it like his personal account. His job as trustee is to follow the terms. Not his feelings. Not family pressure. The terms. She flipped a page and tapped a paragraph. "Here," she said. "Distribution terms. Each grandchild receives their share at age 30. The trustee has no discretionary power to redirect funds to another beneficiary's debt." My throat tightened. "So he wasn't allowed?" I whispered. "No," Mara said flat. "He breached his fiduciary duty." I stared at the words on the page until they blurred. The weird part was I'd known he wasn't allowed in a moral sense, but seeing it in legal language, black and white, made me feel less crazy. Like there was a name for what he did, and it wasn't family helping family. It was wrongdoing. Then Mara smiled, very slightly, and said, "And here's the loophole." I blinked. "Loophole? 2 trustees," she said, tapping the signature page. I leaned forward. There it was. My father's signature, and another line beside it. A co-trustee, a role I didn't even know existed. "Who is that?" I asked, voice sharp. "Your grandmother's attorney," Mara said. "Or rather, the attorney's firm as an institutional co-trustee after his retirement. Your father was never meant to have sole control. He was supposed to co-sign disbursements." My stomach flipped. "So how'd he move the money?" Mara's eyes went colder. "He either forged authority or the bank failed to follow the trust's signing requirements," she said. "Either way, the transfers can be challenged." I felt dizzy. "So we can get it back?" Mara nodded once. "We can attempt to recover," she said, careful because lawyers never promise miracles. "But yes, this gives us leverage. Strong leverage." The next few weeks were surreal. Mara moved like she was used to messy families. She sent demand letters to the bank. She subpoenaed records. She filed for an emergency order to freeze assets, Kyle's accounts, any identifiable transfers, anything the money had touched. There were days my phone would ring and Mara would say they responded, and my whole body would tense like I was bracing for impact. Meanwhile, my family treated me like I'd committed the crime by refusing to be quietly robbed. My mom called me sobbing. "He's your father," she kept saying. "He's so stressed. He's not sleeping. He should have thought about sleep before he stole from me," I said once, and I hated how sharp it sounded, but it was true. Kyle left me voicemails that swung wildly between apology and anger. "I'm sorry," he'd say, voice trembling. Then the next message, "You're ruining my life." Like his life hadn't been ruined by his choices long before I ever hired a lawyer. My dad didn't call me at all. He sent one text, "You're tearing this family apart." I stared at it and typed back, "You did that when you decided Kyle mattered more than me." He didn't reply. When Mara finally got the bank records, the story became uglier. The transfers weren't one emergency payment. They were multiple withdrawals over months. My dad hadn't emptied it in a single act of panic. He'd been bleeding it out quietly, plugging Kyle's holes while looking me in the eye and saying, "When you're 30, you'll have your cushion." Mara showed me the timeline on her screen, dates, amounts, destination accounts. My throat went tight as I recognized patterns, late-night transfers, withdrawals that lined up with known casino trips Kyle had bragged about on social media. It wasn't threats at the door. It was addiction plus enablement. The loophole became our battering ram. Because the trust required dual authorization, and because the institutional co-trustee hadn't signed, the bank had a compliance problem. A big one. Banks don't like compliance problems, especially when they come with documentation. We ended up in a settlement conference first, because apparently, even family betrayal needs a polite meeting with coffee and legal pads before it becomes full war. That was the day of the phone call in the beginning of my post. Mara had my dad on the line because he refused to show up in person. Kyle was there in a room with his own attorney, looking pale and jittery like he'd been living on caffeine and dread. My mom sat behind him like a guardian angel for the guilty. Mara laid it out: breach of trust, improper disbursement, bank negligence, tracing funds. She didn't raise her voice once. She just stacked facts until the room felt heavy. Kyle's attorney tried to argue hardship. He was under duress, he said. He was pressured. Threats. Mara didn't even blink. Then file a police report, she said. There is no report. There are no documented threats. There are, however, documented casino transactions. Kyle flinched like she'd named something shameful out loud. My dad, on speakerphone, kept trying to drag it back into emotional territory. "This isn't who we are," he said. "We're family. I was protecting my son." Mara's voice stayed level. "You were misusing a trust," she said. "Those are not the same thing." And then she asked him, again, if he authorized transfers from the trust to satisfy Kyle's debts. That's when my dad said, I did what I had to do. Like it was noble. Mara clicked her pen, flipped a page, and said, "Then you understand you may be personally liable for the full amount, plus costs." Silence. Kyle started crying, which would have moved me if I hadn't spent my whole life watching him cry whenever consequences showed up. My mom whispered, "Stop. To him, like my daughter, is the problem here, not the fact that my brother had eaten his way through money meant for me." Then Mara delivered the part that made the room shift. "The bank has indicated willingness to remediate due to signing failures," she said. "They will restore the trust funds contingent on a release, and then pursue recovery from improper recipients." Improper recipients. My brother. Kyle's head snapped up. "What?" he said, voice cracking. Mara didn't soften. "The funds can be restored," she said, "but someone has to pay. The bank is not going to absorb that loss voluntarily without pursuing the party who received the money." Kyle looked at my mom like she'd save him. My mom looked at me like I'd done something evil. My dad's voice came through the speaker, suddenly sharper. "So you're going to bankrupt your brother?" he said. I felt something in me go very still. My hand stopped shaking. I leaned toward the microphone and said, quietly, "He already bankrupted me. You just didn't care because you assumed I'd swallow it." There was a long, ugly pause after that. The final deal took weeks. The bank, scared of the compliance nightmare, reinstated my share into a new account under stricter controls. A corporate trustee replaced my dad. That part felt like a funeral and a relief at the same time, because it meant my father, was officially deemed unfit to manage what my grandmother built for us. Kyle was ordered, through the settlement structure, to repay the bank over time. His attorney pushed for manageable installments. My dad raged on the phone. My mom begged me to forgive. Kyle looked like he might vomit from fear. And I felt numb. Not triumphant. Not gleeful. Just exhausted in my bones, like I'd been carrying a weight for years, and someone finally acknowledged it was real. When the funds hit the restored account, Mara called me and said, "It's back." I opened the banking app and stared at the number until I started laughing, silently, because my body didn't know what else to do. Then I cried, not the soft, dignified crying you see in movies, but the kind where your face twists and you have to cover your mouth because you sound like you're breaking. I slid down to the floor of my apartment, phone in hand, and felt something unclench that I didn't realize had been locked for a long time. The fallout with my family was predictable. My dad didn't speak to me for months. When he finally did, it wasn't an apology. It was a statement. "You embarrassed me," he said. I said, "You robbed me." He said, "I did it for Kyle." I said, "And you did it to me." My mom tried to keep the illusion of family by inviting us all to dinner like nothing happened. Kyle showed up once, eyes down, quiet, like he'd been forced into a new shape by legal consequences. Halfway through the meal, he looked at me and said, "I really am sorry." It was the first time it sounded like a sentence with weight. Not because he'd suddenly become a saint, but because he wasn't asking for anything while saying it. I didn't forgive him that night. I didn't do the dramatic thing. I just nodded once and said, "Okay." Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a switch. It's a long road, and sometimes you don't even know if you want to walk it yet. What I did do was change things. I moved my savings into a separate account. I stopped sharing financial details with my parents. I locked down everything I could lock down. I updated my emergency contacts. I started therapy because apparently you don't go through your father stole your inheritance without it rewiring your nervous system. People keep asking me if I feel guilty. Family, friends, relatives. Even my mom sometimes, in her softer moments, like she's testing whether I'll take the bait and become the family doormat again. Here's the truth. I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel embarrassed sometimes, because no matter how right you are, it's humiliating to admit you had to legally protect yourself from your own parents. I feel grief for the version of my dad I thought existed, the one who would have protected me the way he protected Kyle. But guilt? No. My grandmother made a plan for a reason. She knew my family's dynamics, even if no one else wanted to name them. She put the co-trustee there like a lock on a door she knew someone would try to open. That loophole wasn't an accident. It was her last act of protection, and in the ugliest way possible, it worked. The money is back, but the real inheritance I recovered wasn't just dollars in an account. It was the part of me that finally accepted being the responsible one doesn't mean you're obligated to be the sacrificial one. Not even for family. Especially not for family.